Welcome back to the Ken Matthews Report. It is my pleasure to have a feature film producer, writer, director, and author, Joel Gilbert, on the show. And I have to show you this before we even get started, because this is the book. This is my favorite thing of yours, with the exception of Michelle, the Michelle Obama thing. But this is a must read. I don't know why this is not in high school classrooms across the country now. But Joel Gilbert, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for taking time to come on.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
So you have made, I've seen, just so you know, I've seen everything you've done except one of the Bob Dylan.
Okay.
So, and yeah, I've seen all the stuff you've done. And for people who don't know, you, like anybody who attempts to tell the truth or offers an alternate theory to what the government says, or a narrative that's different than what people have been trained to believe, we're called conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, it's certainly a way that the left and the legacy media dismiss any bit of information that they don't want to cover, or they're too lazy to cover. You mentioned my previous film and book, The Trayvon Hoax. I completely blew the lid off the 2013 Trayvon Martin case, where George Zimmerman was put on trial, by exposing that the main key witness against Zimmerman was Rachel Gentel, the chubby Haitian girl who was 150 pounds heavier and 2 years older than Trayvon.
Mm-hmm.
I found out that was not his girlfriend. She was not on the phone with Trayvon. It was a different girl named Brittany Diamond Eugene. And I showed that Ben Crump and the Martin family knew that. They had met with the real girlfriend, but used the fake witness when the girlfriend would not lie to the police. And of course, all of American history changed, because Black Lives Matter was founded based on Zimmerman being acquitted, and Obama embraced Black Lives Matter, and ruined race relations in this country because of this hoax of a case. So you do get the media having to cover that only when they're forced to. When George Zimmerman sued Ben Crump, the state of Florida, and the Martin family for using a fake witness, the media did cover it grudgingly. So that's how they work. First they dismiss you, and then they eventually have to cover it. They will.
The interesting thing about that is, even now, after you have revealed it, and this has happened in several cases with your work, after you reveal it, people, they still, well, obviously many still don't believe it, but they just refuse to cover it. It's almost as if the media knows it's so vast that if they just ignore something, if we just ignore the Biden laptop, today on the 24th of July, 2023, they're still ignoring the Biden laptop. They're still pretending there's nothing there. So do you feel, I mean, how do you punch through that as a journalist? How do you take on somebody that, even if you show them the evidence, they're just going to go, all right, we just won't run it?
Yeah, they do believe the time is on their side, that if they ignore something for a day, a week, or even if it has to be a few months, that everyone will eventually move on, and that'll be like an old news, and it's already been disproven. They'll say something like that. So it is a challenge. But I think the public has moved a great deal. When I came out with my film, Dreams from My Real Father.
That was a good one.
Yeah, 2012, I made the case, which I think is true. Obama's father was not the Kenyan Obama, the Kenyan student. His real biological father, I believe, was Frank Marshall Davis, the man who looks just like him and who raised Obama, admittedly, in Hawaii. And I think, more importantly, radicalized him into this socialist communist worldview. Frank Marshall Davis was a card-carrying Communist Party USA member and a radical communist. So when that first came out, I had a lot of people say to me, well, this can't be true because CNN hasn't covered it. It must not be true. Now, within about a year or two, people started saying, well, of course, CNN would be afraid to touch this. So with the Donald Trump years, I think the public has really been educated and seen, and the media has been exposed what a shills they are for the establishment and how fraudulent their message is. And I think you can see that in how low the ratings are for CNN. But it is always a challenge to break through the media trying to cover for the powers that be.
People that do the research, and there's many of us that do it, especially podcasters, it seems that the podcast world has become, ironically, the more credible world for.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with that.
And I think it's because we do so much research and we are held to a higher standard. In other words, and conservatives have always been held to a higher standard, that you could go on any Sunday news show and you could just throw stuff out. Like, everybody knows Donald Trump is he started the insurrection and he's an asset of Russia. Now, I can't say that about people because I would get in trouble, and neither could you, because you're a target, because you're a truth teller. The interesting thing, though, as you said, there is an awakening going on. Now it's almost to the point, and I say this often, if you don't see it on the 6 o'clock news, chances are it's important.
Well, we've reached another level where I remember visiting the Soviet Union back in 1984 when I was a student, and I visited families that were trying to leave Russia, and they would tell me their stories of how because they applied to leave the Soviet Union, they lost their jobs, they had their apartments raided by the KGB, and they would tell me how the news media is so corrupt and it's all lies. Pravda, the state newspaper in Russia, they said is all lies. And after they told me the story, I'd see them reading a copy of Pravda. And I'd say, wait a minute, why are you reading Pravda? You told me it was all lies. And he said, well, this is how we find out the truth, because whatever we read, we know that the opposite is really true. So when you watch CNN, whatever they're telling you, you pretty much know it's the very opposite is going to be true.
Well, I'm finding that, and I want to get your thoughts on this because you're pretty plugged in. Well, first of all, before I forget, let's talk about, and I just saw it, I think I saw it a couple hours before I called you to set up the interview, Michelle Obama 2024. And I don't know if you caught Roger Stone over the weekend. He was speaking at one of these conferences. This is conference season. And he was at the Turning Point Action Conference. And it sounds like Roger Stone is in the same wheelhouse with you. He said that Biden will not be the nominee in 2024. Kamala Harris will briefly be a placeholder, and then they'll probably try to nominate Michelle Obama. So carry on with your research.
Yeah, I think, Roger's seen my film and he's interviewed me a few times. I think he's absolutely correct. It's true that Democrats don't want Biden. He's very much a liability because of his age, his level of dementia, and his very corrupt practices with his son in extorting money from Ukraine and China and these other countries. So I think he's definitely a liability, and really no one wants him. Biden does not have a campaign office. He's not campaigning. And I think it's pretty clear that he's not going to be the Democrat nominee in 2024. What I did in my film, Michelle Obama 2024, I did a complete background research of Michelle's entire life story. And you can see right now that the Democrats have actually laid the foundation for Michelle to run for president, because instead of the first primary being in Iowa, like it's been for 100 years, where you have to go and campaign in 100 counties, they moved the first primary to South Carolina, which has 50% of its Democrat Party primary voters are African American. And it's also a state that Michelle claims as an adopted home state because her grandparents are from South Carolina. And she used to go there for reunions when she was growing up. And of course, they put the DNC of all places in Chicago. So it looks like a hometown girl, convention they set up. So I'm looking at this November as the key month, because December 23rd is the deadline for submitting signatures to a number of states to get on the Democrat primary ballot. So I'm thinking in November, Biden is going to say he's not running for any number of reasons. It could be his health, because he's being impeached by the Republicans, any number of reasons. And that's when Michelle will be the only person that could be nominated, because she's the only person that can raise $100 million in 1 week and get all the signatures she needs in 1 week, because she's so popular. She's had 15 years of all positive publicity, hundreds of magazine covers, talk shows, and she's been working on her outreach to women and minorities, the key Democrat voting groups. And I've been following the Obamas for years, and I noticed that Michelle Obama, since really 2016, has been following the exact same formula as Barack did to become president.
Exactly.
Yeah, Michelle was the keynote speaker for Joe Biden in 2020, introduced the candidate at the convention, just like Barack was the keynote speaker and introduced John Kerry. Barack wrote 2 autobiographies before running for president, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope. Michelle wrote Becoming, and her new autobiography called The Light We Carry. It's also, both of those are specials on Netflix. And Barack had a voter registration organization called Project Vote in Chicago before he became president. Michelle started When We All Vote. She's been running around the country registering voters. So she's just following the exact same formula as Barack, and I think she's very well positioned to get the nomination. And really, she's the best loved Democrat. When she introduced Joe Biden, she said 3 sentences in 2020 that I said, oh, that's exactly what she's going to say when she runs for president. She said, you know, I hate politics, but I love this nation and I love your children. So that's what she's going to say, I think, in November.
Wow. No, your analysis is brilliant, and you catch things that some of us catch, some of us don't. But the media, I wonder, and maybe you can explain this. Is the media, because I know there's a lot of people in the mainstream corporate media, because I used to work in it, that aren't that bright. But there's also some people that are pretty savvy, like the Pravda level propaganda, like, you know, put this picture up instead of this picture because it makes this guy look bad, it makes this guy look good. And it's amazing that, and for people just tuning in or watching this, you just laid out something that no one has been talking about. No, you just laid out and that's when I watched your movie. The first thing I did is try to get in touch with you, and you responded, and I'm grateful you did. No one's laid this out. And I remember saying to my wife, it's so crazy because now both our kids are of voting age, but I'm trying to think, you were talking about the speech she gave. And then I remember when, let's see, Obama was elected, our kids were little then. And I remember one of them was in the hospital. I can't remember what it's for. Shame on me. I'm a bad dad. Shame on me. Evil. So we go there to visit him. I think it might've been, I don't know, wisdom teeth, something. And I go down to the gift shop. Okay. And it's like 2009. And every single magazine cover is either Michelle or Barack or both. Every single. I remember I took a picture of it for my wife. And I said, can you believe this? That's in 2009. And it's funny that you've been following them for a long, long time. And I just saw the amount of propaganda that she commands, and the awesome press, from Ellen to Meet the Press to Good Morning America.
Yeah, the Obamas have just been the darlings of the media ever since 2008. Now, you might remember that Michelle really is a better politician than Barack. She's a better
very much
speaker.
So, yeah.
She comes across more authentic, and she uses emotion better than Barack. So much so that she was actually getting bigger crowds than Barack in 2008. She was on the campaign trail on her own, and she was giving speeches to these huge crowds as the co-candidate. She'd say things like, Barack and I, our campaign, what we're going to do in the White House. She was the co-candidate, and she gave these very nasty anti-American speeches every night. She'd say things like, you can't buy food in this country. You can't pay for mortgage. You can't afford childcare. Don't get sick in this country. Not here. And one night she went over the top and she said, for the first time in my life, I'm proud of my country because Barack won a primary. Now, she said a lot nastier things than that, but the media picked up on that, and it became a firestorm. So that's when the Obama campaign said, look, now they're paying attention to what you're saying. People are going to hate you like they hate Hillary, and we could lose the White House because of you. So she realized she couldn't do that anymore. So she got a speechwriter, and she made up a story. She said, I hate politics, and I just want to be the mom in chief. So they ran with that narrative to protect her in the media and gave her magazine covers and talk shows and sitcoms. And she kind of stayed behind the scenes for some time. but she is a very, very political person. Her father was a precinct captain in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
She grew up political family. She
As like
ran
you
for,
said, yeah, she didn't grow up on the south side of Chicago,
correct.
outside in front of the burning trash can trying to stay warm. She grew
That's
up in
right.
an upper middle class home, and
That's
she
right.
had a lot of breaks.
Well, she was into politics. Her father was a politician. She was out stumping with him from age 4. She
Hmm.
was best friends with Santita Jackson, Jesse Jackson's daughter. So she kind of grew up in Jesse Jackson's house in high school when he was running for president. So she's all about politics. Now, one of the big things that I reveal in my film and my book is that Michelle has been creating a phony narrative, a false story of her life history. The same as Barack had a fabricated background, so does Michelle. Michelle claims that she grew up in the south side of Chicago. Not true. She's from South Shore. She claims that she was held back in life because of her skin color. She was discriminated against, and she overcame all these racial obstacles. It's complete fabrication. I show that Michelle grew up afraid of Black people. The neighbors would beat her up they told her she acted white and talked white, which really meant you had an attitude that you think you're better than everybody. Michelle writes in her book about getting in a fist fight with a girl who called her an Oreo, which is a major insult. It means you're
I
black
saw
on the
that.
outside,
Yeah.
you're really white on the inside. So she grew up, I got it on tape. She says in my film, she says, in my house, we were in fear. She was afraid to go outside. And then in her professional career, I trace this in the film and book, Michelle gets her revenge on the Black community. She works for the mayor of Chicago. She's the assistant planning commissioner, and she destroys 20,000 homes of Black people living in the projects. And they give away the land to the Democrat Party donor developers like Tony Rezko, who wanted the land to build high-rise buildings near downtown. And having proven how callous she was toward the Black community, Michelle was hired by the University of Chicago Medical Center to prevent the Black Southsiders from using their emergency room. People would show up there without good insurance, and Michelle would put them in these vans and ship them out. It's called patient dumping. It was illegal.
Mhm.
She'd ship them back to the South Side to these crappy clinics. So Michelle was always hired by white liberal elites to deal with their problems with Black people. They couldn't hire a white person to kick Black people out of their homes and tell them, this is good for you. That's what Michelle would do. She'd say, this is going to be good for you. She'd kick them out of the emergency room and say that you're better off. Michelle made millions of dollars exploiting the Black community. So Michelle's phony narrative that, oh, I'm just one of these ordinary Black folks that suffer discrimination, complete lie. Michelle was an elitist. She exploited Black people. She got as far away from them quickly as she could. She moved to Hyde Park. Her and her brother went to high schools to study with white kids. Instead of going 1 block away from their house to South Shore High School, which was all Black, her brother Craig goes to an expensive private Catholic school far away. Michelle goes an hour and a half away to a magnet school. Michelle goes to Princeton, Harvard. She marries a biracial man. She never has any Black friends. She has no common experiences with the Black community. But that's her fake narrative. She wants to manipulate and trick minority and Black voters into thinking that, well, I'm just one of you and I had the same experiences. And it's completely phony.
If you could excuse me for 1 second, you may notice that one of our studio lights is set wrong, and I think I'm going blind in my right eye.
Okay.
So I'm just but while I do that, I want you to address.
Yeah.
It'll take like 2 seconds. I don't normally do this, but hey, it's a podcast. I love being unedited and.
Okay, Marco Rubio got a drink of water. You can adjust.
Oh, that's a good point. By the way, do you want a drink? Do you need a drink or anything?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Tell our audience about her wardrobe shift in her image making.
Yeah, that's very fascinating because I actually interviewed Michelle's celebrity hairdresser named Michael Ronnie Flowers that she had from age 18 in Chicago. And she was always from high school hitting the Miracle Mile in Chicago. That's where they had all the big world famous fashion designers like Maria Pinto and Ikram Goldman. So Michelle was always known for being a fashionista, having the most expensive, fanciest designer clothes. At Harvard University, her professors remarked how she was always so well dressed. When Barack became US Senator and started becoming famous, Michelle was placed on the Vanity Fair top 25 international best dress list with all the latest designs. So that's 2005. Now, I show in my film that when Michelle shows up on the campaign trail for Barack in 2008, she doesn't show up as a fashionista and say, hey, I'm another Harvard lawyer like my husband. I'm another elitist. No, she doesn't do that. She uses her fashion and her language to pretend to be something she's not, to trick the voters. She shows up without combing her hair. It's almost hilarious. You can see she doesn't comb her hair. She shows up wearing old t-shirts and an old sweater to look like what she imagined a 1950s black housewife might look like. So she looks terrible, but she puts on this phony narrative that, well, I'm just one of you, and I had trouble raising my kids, and I couldn't pay back my student loans. And she even puts on a phony urban accent when speaking to black audiences. And that's in the film as well. You'll see how she's always pretending, always manipulating, using whatever she can. So she used her fashion and her speech to manipulate voters. Of course, when she got back in the White House, she was back to herself. She got to be on all these magazine covers, big fashionista, and she only used her phony urban accent when she spoke to black audiences occasionally.
And you pointed that out so well in the film. Now that we've shared this with our audience, I'm probably going to use some clips of it in future montages and stuff. But Hillary does that. Barack has always done it. Barack, you look at these individuals, both Michelle and Barack, extremely well educated, extremely articulate, good speakers, and they just flip on a dime. And the fact that nobody picks up, if it would be, I was raised in the South, but I was born in Jersey. I escaped in 1996 with my family before they put the barbed wire up and made it a communist state. And I remember, I really stood out in the South going to Southern, because I don't have an accent, but most of my friends, they had that accent, a Southern accent, which I think is fine accent, but I never changed it. And because people see through it, but it's something about the media. They never pick up on it. I mean, people like yourself do, or other truth seekers do, but I just wish once someone would say, Michelle, why here you talk like a Princeton lawyer, and now you're talking like you grew up on a farm in South Carolina? What's going on?
Well, Michelle puts on a phony, urban lingo when speaking to black audiences. I think it's very insulting and very condescending. But Michelle's, ironically, has the same problem that Barack had. When Barack ran for president in 2008, white people thought it was great. We want a black president. That'd be great. White people thought he was black. But in the black community, they didn't think he was black. They said he wasn't black enough. He was raised by white grandparents in Hawaii and Indonesia, biracial. They didn't buy into him. And it took Michelle put in a lot of work to convince black voters that Obama was one of them. Michelle, ironically, has the same problem. She her real problem is that she really is an Oreo. When Barack met Michelle, he even wrote about how she reminded him of his white grandmother. He said her family was like Leave It to Beaver out of the 1950s, sitcom.
I remember that quote.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle's worshipped Mary Tyler Moore growing up. She watched the Brady Bunch every night. She was in dance lessons from age 7. Till through high school, she took jazz and tap and performed all over Chicago.
She's a pretty good pianist as well.
Took piano. Michelle went to Paris in high school with her French class. I didn't go to Paris with my French class. So she was a very elite kid. She always studied with whites and had white friends. So that's her real phoniness, is that she really is mostly a white girl, an Oreo. And she has to go over the top. She doesn't know how to behave or to relate any experience as a black person. So she has to make things up. You might remember the 60 Minutes interview she did with Barack in 2008 with Steve Kroft. She said, well, Barack, being black, he could just get shot going to the gas station.
I loved his response. Even he went, what?
Yeah, he rolled his eyes. Now, she doesn't know better. So her implication was that if you're black, a white person could shoot you down at any second. Now, if you get shot at a gas station in Chicago, it's more likely a black gang member was shooting at another black gang member and you got caught in the crossfire. But Michelle doesn't know. So she always exaggerates and makes things up that are ridiculous because she doesn't know anything about the black community. I mean, I would advise Donald Trump to start on Michelle now and say things like, Michelle, are you going to apologize for what you did to the black community in Chicago? Michelle, how much money did you make denying access to healthcare to black people in Chicago? And if Michelle says to him, you'll never know what it's like growing up as a black woman in America, then Trump should say, well, neither do you, because Michelle really has no experiences with the black community, and that's why she fakes it. And that's her biggest weakness. I think black voters are no fools. If they understood and knew how much time Michelle spent running away from the black community and exploiting and abusing them in her professional career, they would not support the Obamas.
We have three great 4-year snapshots of reality that now have been exposed, in my opinion, that have brought more people of color to the right. I think a lot of people of color are more conservative than they let on, just because of peer pressure. But we have Barack Obama's first term, where every time he made a mistake, they said, come on, he's new, he's historic, come on. Then by the second term, a lot of his constituents, including woke white people, woke white puppets, were like, what? Wait a minute, he's not delivering. Now, here comes Donald Trump. And the first thing he does, one of the first things, is sign prison reform and start releasing black people that were wrongly accused or over sentenced. So this is where I think your theory really has weight, because if we didn't have 8 years of Obama, some of the worst policies, it was horrific for the black population. I mean, maybe as far as a morale booster, it was great. You can rap about my president and Jimmy Kimmel can play stupid again, but they've seen. And then Trump comes in and he says, I don't care what color you are. If you're a small business owner, you're going to prosper. More black businesses opened, teenage black unemployment at an all-time low under Donald Trump. So you're absolutely correct. If Trump was smart, I would spend less time on, the some of the other people in the race and start getting, start setting the stage. Because I think, like you said, she's going to come out of nowhere.
Well, let me comment look, the Obamas ruined race relations in this country. The polls were saying that 70% of blacks and whites thought race relations were good when he took office. When he left office, it flipped. It was only 30% thought race relations were good. And the reason for that is because Obama didn't deliver anything for minorities of the black community in his first term. Inflation got worse. Illegals were coming in, taking over jobs, driving down wages. And by the third year of his presidency, there was a lot of doubt if black people would support him again. They thought, once again, well, he's a phony. He's not one of us. He didn't do anything for the black community. And you could see the Obama cabinet was all white people. You could just see that the agenda was socialist. It wasn't toward helping minorities like he promised. So that's when Obama, with Al Sharpton and the Justice Department, picked up on the Trayvon Martin case. After Zimmerman was exonerated by the police after a long investigation, they said this is pure self-defense. Zimmerman was getting his head bashed into the concrete. The guy kept pummeling him, and he called the police, and he eventually fired one shot to save his life. It's over. And that's when Ben Crump and the FBI, the state of Florida, came up with this fake witness, Rachel Jeantel, who falsely claimed she was on the phone with Trayvon, and she heard things over the phone that were different from the eyewitness that saw everything. And Obama said, well, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And when Black Lives Matter formed, he embraced them and brought them into the White House. Michelle Obama was in on it too. I'll give you one example from the film. She was on David Letterman, and she told this great story. She was so happy. She said she went to Target incognito in Washington. And she said that a very short woman, she didn't say the race, it was probably a black lady. She said this very short woman asked her to grab something off the top shelf because Michelle was so tall. And Michelle said, I gave it to her. And she said to me, you didn't have to make that look so easy. And Michelle laughed. They laughed together. And Michelle said it was great. I said, "Oh, David Letterman, it's in the film." And then after the Trayvon Martin thing, Michelle does an interview for Essence magazine, and she recasts the Target story and said that someone asked her to get something off the top shelf because of her race. It's made into a racial thing.
I remember that.
Completely opposite of the real story. So the Obamas ruined race relations just so they could inflame the Black community into coming out and voting for them again. And Michelle's been working on that same narrative for years, trying to instill in the Black community that she suffered discrimination just like them, and they need to support her and all her programs because she's just one of them. But it just couldn't be more phony.
Well, if you, I read a lot of books. My audience knows that. I'm sure you do as well. And I like to read books, the whole spectrum, the whole range. I don't just read books the most conservative books I can find. In fact, I read her first book, which really, it was extremely well written, but it was a fantasy. Her, being Michelle or whatever it was called.
Yeah, becoming.
I'm sorry.
Well, becoming. It's funny that you say that because it was actually written by a white woman named Sarah Corbett from New England.
Well, so there you go.
For Michelle to tell her real story, she didn't need a Black woman from the inner city to understand her. She needed a white woman from the Northeast. Sarah Corbett wrote it. Michelle provided some of the basic facts as she changed them to be, but it's well written by a ghostwriter, as is her second book, The Light We Carry. It came out, and Michelle went on a book tour with it, just like with Becoming. And of course, Oprah Winfrey was her interviewer at her very last tour stop here in Los Angeles. I was there.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was like a campaign event. I mean, people came 2 hours early. They were dancing and screaming for Michelle. It was like a campaign event. And they released that on Netflix at the end of March, or I think the end of April, with Oprah, as the host. Very similar.
That. Yep.
Don't forget, it is Oprah Winfrey that introduced Obama in 2008 and got her audience of white women to buy into the Obama candidacy. So Oprah is very much a part of the Obamas communicating to the public.
So one thing we know now, people are learning. I'm sure a lot of people are shocked by some of the content of this interview. It won't be the first time on this show, but Truth will do that. And they are, I think it's safe to say, they're media ninjas. They have no shame about, okay, what do we need to do to move this demographic, this color, this race, this religion? What do we have to do? Well, you're going to have to wear a burqa. All right, give me a burqa. They're very comfortable with the shape shifting. Like John Kerry with the gun. I need the gun. I need the NRA vote. Give me a go. How does this work?
Yeah, I'll tell you an example. Here's a great example: is Michelle never wore braids in her life, ever.
Oh, I remember that.
Not as a kid, not in high school, not in college, not in Chicago, not in the White House, ever. She never had African-American hairstyles of any kind. She had a celebrity hairdresser, like many celebrities in Chicago all those years. Never had braids. For her The Light We Carry tour, all of a sudden, Michelle has all these braids and things in her hair. And she even made the statement, she said, "Oh, I didn't wear braids in the White House because America couldn't handle it. We were the first Black family. I didn't think the country could handle it." It's a complete lie. All of a sudden, she's making herself over as a young urban African-American with her hairstyle. So that's typical Michelle Obama. She uses these very simple things like fashion, speech, hair to manipulate voters.
They're so comfortable with lying. And that brings me to the point. So everything you're saying here is accurate. Many people have vetted it. You've vetted it. How much hate do you get over saying these things? I mean, I'll tell you, Joel, I'm surprised you're still alive.
Well, look,
I'm very happy you're still alive, by the way.
Right now, it's the same with my film Dreams from My Real Father back in 2012.
Oh, I remember the heat that guy.
So I'm kind of in the initial stage with that film was they tried to ignore it because they thought, well, this will just go away in a few weeks. And it never did. It just grew and grew and grew in terms of people paying attention. So then they went into phase two, which is they had the leftist media attack me. And BarackObama.com actually attacked me. I'm very proud of that webpage. I still have it. And they didn't deny that Frank Marshall Davis was Obama's dad. They just said that, I forget what they said. It was just attacking me. So I think we're still in the stage before the leftist media wants to attack me, but they're not going to be very successful, because I went to Chicago. I talked to 3 of Michele's boyfriends, 2 elementary school classmates, high school classmates, high school teacher and principal, elementary teacher and principal. I talked to her mother. Okay. I talked to her friends. I talked to her thesis advisor at Princeton University. No one's ever done that. And you learn a great deal about Michele from her Princeton thesis.
That was amazing. Like I said, it's so indicative of your thorough research. I like the fact that you're not vindictive. You're not mean. You just kind of, in your films, and I said I've seen most of them, you just kind of go about your business and say, oh, by the way, here's the truth. Here's the proof. Next. And I don't think people know how to handle that, because they can't go after you and say racist or bitter or something, because you're just doing what the news media doesn't have the balls to do.
Yeah, they refuse to do the job. I mean, with the Trayvon Martin case, I simply got the text messages that were available of Trayvon Martin, 3,000 text messages, 3,000 photos, emails from his phone that was extracted, a 700-page document extracted by the police. Now, anybody could have walked into the state of Florida and gotten a hold of that document and seen that there were text messages from Brittany Diamond Eugene, where Trayvon said, send me, that was his girlfriend, said, send me a picture. And she sent a picture of herself to Trayvon. It's right there. The photo is right there. And that's not Rachel Jeantel. So how no one took the time to even look at the evidence is beyond me. So is the case with Michele Obama. The media has simply repeated whatever she has said. That's why she wrote 2 autobiographies, just like Barack did, because she wants to set the record and change the past as a political document. She doesn't want people to look into this. The media will just quote Michele, whatever she said about her childhood and discrimination, being held back in life. One of the big things I discovered was I debunked Michele's lie for 15 years. She's been claiming that her high school counselor racially profiled her regarding her applying to Princeton University. She's even told Gayle King a couple months ago, she said, the counselor said, you're Black, maybe you're stretching going to Princeton. Well, it turns out her high school counselor was a church-going Black woman named Nan King, who was also an assistant principal. There's no way she racially profiled her. The worst thing she could have said was, you know, Michele, your test scores are too low for Princeton. You might want to get some backup options. That's
which translates in the Democrat speak. Well, that's racist.
Well, even that, I mean, everyone's been told that you need some backup options. And if you're going for Princeton, they have a very high requirement for SAT scores. Your scores are low. Make sure you have some backup options. So just like the Target story, Michele turned it into a racial incident to manipulate Black voters and minorities into thinking, well, she's just like me. She's an ordinary Black folk like me. So she's one of us. Michele is not one of them.
So do you think, now I know you mentioned it earlier, what kind of battle will that be? What kind of political battle would that be if it comes down to, well, let me ask you this. Do you think Trump's going to be the nominee?
I think Trump will be the nominee.
Okay.
I think my assessment is that the process is already over, and the only way to stop him would be to convict him and put him in jail, which the Democrats are working very hard at doing right now.
So let's say he becomes a nominee, and it is Michele Obama. How does that play out? Will the awakening continue? Are people, I'm hoping people will have the same response to the Clintons that they had with the Clintons and the Bushes and any dynasty that tries to, it's like what Bill did with Hillary. Hey, here's my wife. Take her. No,
well,
my wife.
Michele has carved out an identity for herself separate from Barack through 15 years of positive publicity. She's the most beloved first lady. They call her the forever first lady. So she has her own audience that she's worked on for years and years. And Michele Obama, for the deep state ballot harvesters and people that cheat on elections, she solves a major problem because she brings plausibility. If you said Joe Biden is leading in all the polls in the swing states by 10%, no one believes it. If they say Joe Biden won all the swing states on election night, he's going to be president again, no one would believe it. With Michelle Obama, they say she's leading in the swing states or she won. You'd say, well, I guess I believe it because she's so popular. So she supplies the plausibility, but she'd be a massive hurdle to overcome just based on her media support, the fact that she's the best loved Democrat. All the Democrats love Obama. They want him back in the White House.
Well, he's there now.
Well, you might remember the saddest piece of presidential video footage in history from last year when Obama went to the White House and he was just mobbed by all the staffers, touching him, shaking his hand, smiling. And Joe Biden was wandering around behind him and eventually tapped him on the shoulder, and Obama ignored it. So they want Obama back in the White House, and they would love to have Michelle. And it's going to be very hard for any Republican to overcome Michelle Obama candidacy. She's probably the most popular person in the country, if not the world. But I think the key is exposing her phoniness, that she's not somebody that is identifies with or has any experiences that the Black community had. She's someone that abused the Black community, exploited them, and ran away from them.
Yeah, the hospital thing in your film is very, some of that was, I had not heard that before, and it was well backed up, and I forgot that she was a player in Chicago politics, that the phone calls can be made, and then you have to dial in, and don't forget, Valerie Jarrett, a current advisor, along with Barack Obama, they've been in the White House for the last 3 years, in and out of the White House with that team, along with Susan Rice, who I think just left. So it's almost like the gang's all back in town, of everybody's back.
Yeah, look, Valerie Jarrett actually works on Michelle's voter registration organization through Civic Nation. When We All Vote is part of Civic Nation, run by Valerie Jarrett. Obama regularly consults with members of Congress. So I think it's all just set up. It's that nobody has really noticed it yet, but there is now consensus that Biden is not running again. He has, no campaign office. He's likely going to be impeached by the Republicans probably by November. And as I said earlier, that's the key month. And by the way, to watch the film, you can actually live stream the movie on SalemNow.com. SalemNow.com, you can watch the movie. And then the book version is on Amazon.com along with the DVD.
And you can also buy the DVD if you'd like. Correct. If you want something to give like to your great grandparents or your grandparents who don't have the technology, but you don't have it on VHS though.
Not on VHS. We got DVD or live stream or the book version.
So what is your next project? Because this is so timely and remarkable, and I can't stress enough to see it and put Joel on top of your list for research. So many of your things fit together, like when you put together the Trayvon thing, your Obama coverage, and this Michelle movie, you really get a sense of how much the media is on these people's side, that they want to get communists in office.
Yeah, look, a lot of this revolves around the fact that a lot of them are based out of New York City, which is kind of a hotbed of communism over the years. David Axelrod's parents were both Communist Party newspaper writers, as was Barack Obama's, I believe, real father, Frank Marshall Davis, was a writer for the communist newspaper in Hawaii called the Honolulu Record. Valerie Jarrett's father-in-law, Vernon Jarrett, was a Communist Party writer for a newspaper called The Defender in Chicago. So you can imagine sitting there in the White House, all of them are red diaper babies. They're the children of Communist Party members. And the connections to Marxists and communists run very deep. Something I revealed in my film that most people don't know is that Michelle was very close to Bernadine Dorn.
I was just going to ask you. Yep.
Head of the Weather Underground, along with her husband, Bill Ayers. Now, people know that Bill Ayers was very cozy with Barack, and there's a very good argument by Jack Cashill that Bill Ayers ghost wrote Obama's book, Dreams from My Father. Now, Michelle actually worked with Bernadine Dorn for 2 years at the Sidley and Austin law firm, and Barack and Michelle would go to the Ayers-Dorn home once a week for dinner in the 90s. Their kids were very close. And Michelle actually invited Bernardine Dorn to be her very first guest lecturer at Public Allies, which was a community organizing group that Michelle ran for 3 years in Chicago. So you can't overestimate the amount of influence that these 60s domestic terrorists had both on Barack and Michelle. So much so that Michelle's anti-American speeches that she gave in 2008 were word for word copied from Bernardine Dorn. Bernardine Dorn talked about this thing in the 60s called the politics of fear, how we're all afraid of each other. Blacks and whites and Oriental, and America is afraid of Russia, that all the policies are based on fear. That's all Michelle talked about, word for word. You can see it in my movie. She copies and mimics Bernardine Dorn. So it's a very scary when you think about it, that this group of domestic terrorists had more influence on the destruction of America, not from the bombs they set in the late 60s, but from the influence that they exerted on this Obama couple in Chicago.
Now, in addition to yourself, who else out there do you think? Is there anything even near the level of corporate media impact that would take this as seriously as you're doing? Is there, in other words, are we going to have to keep looking for the Joel Gilberts throughout this process? Or do you think there's going to be some awakening? Because I think it's safe to say we lost Fox as far as truth telling goes.
Yeah, look, there's even in the mainstream legacy media, there is a consensus now that Biden is not running again. So they haven't really made the leap to, well, what about Gavin Newsom? Well, sometimes they say, well, what about Michelle? No, she hates politics. So they haven't kind of gotten there yet.
Right.
But I think if you just look at what Michelle's been doing, as I mentioned earlier, she has cleverly positioned herself copying what Barack did to become president. Michelle never has had an original idea. She just copies Barack. If you look on her Twitter, she repeats whatever's going on in the Democrat Party talking points. Back in 2020, she said the BLM protesters were mostly peaceful. So she's somebody that just copies others. And yeah. I think the media will come along once Biden drops out. Then they'll seriously start to look at other alternatives. And there is no other alternative other than Michelle Obama.
So are you going on a tour with this, the book and the film, or are you lecturing? How are you getting this out?
Well, it's on SalemNow.com, which has nationwide reach. There's also a book version. I've been doing a lot of interviews. I get invited to events and doing some film screenings. So it's starting to build up. The same thing happened with Dreams from My Real Father. It took a couple of months.
Yeah.
When people in the conservative world said, "Oh my God, we got to get this out," and then it exploded after that. So that's what I'm expecting, and I think November is the key month.
Who's the biggest challenge for you? Is it Republicans that are too afraid to embrace this level of truth? You know, Democrats are just going to push back automatically, but do you find Republicans are like, "Oh, come on, Joel, we can't go down that road"? Are they still doing that?
Well, look, they're very hesitant. And don't forget, Michelle Obama provides the left with their very best weapon, which is race. So just like if you opposed Obama trashing the Constitution or his socialist goals, well, that's racist. So there's going to be a lot of hesitancy to take on Michelle Obama because they know that they're going to come after and say, well, not only are you racist, but you're sexist too. So there's going to be hesitancy. I mean, a lot of censorship on the right is self-censorship out of fear of what will happen if I don't go along. What do you think all this woke stuff is about? These corporate woke policies. Like Major League Baseball didn't really care that Georgia eliminated drop boxes or something along those lines. They just didn't want to be accused of being racist, which the left was ready to do. So they moved the All-Star game last year to Colorado in 5 minutes notice. There's a lot of fear among the corporate world, among Republicans, of getting beat up on social media. I've heard that before. If I talk about this, if I do this, they'll trash me on social media. They'll accuse me of something. So to talk about a Michelle Obama candidacy, they're going to be very careful because, they might accuse me of racism or sexism.
A couple more questions if you have a moment.
Sure.
The COVID vaccine. Is there going to be another pandemic? And are they going to keep ignoring all the dead people from the COVID-19 vaccine, which has now been proven? Or what's going to happen there? And will you make a movie on that?
I think they do ignore it because if they publicize it or talk about the consequences, then they start being held responsible for their policies. I think they just wanted to kind of go away and move on. I don't have a COVID movie in the works. I do have another movie, but I don't really talk about stuff until it comes out because I usually am working on something that's very revelatory. So I don't want anyone to know about it.
Okay.
So I think the COVID thing continues to die down and no one wants to talk about it.
Do you think the same thing's going to happen with the 2020 election, trying to get to the truth? I just saw Laura Ingraham giving President Trump advice last night in one of her comments, and she said, stop talking about 2020, let it go. And I'm thinking, is it just going to disappear? Are they going to get away with it clean?
Look, Donald Trump was the most popular president in recent memory since Ronald Reagan. He produced an incredible economy, energy independence, all the reform. He started getting tremendous support from minorities with the bail reform. He had peace in the world, no wars. Everything was going right. So the idea that Joe Biden from his basement, who couldn't put two sentences together, who made blatant racist comments, that he got 16 million more votes than Barack Obama in his heyday. Barack got 65 million when he ran for re-election. Trump got 75 million votes, which outpaced Obama by 10 million votes, showing his popularity. And then the idea that Biden got 81 million votes out of his basement, I think is universally recognized as preposterous. And when you look at the interference in the election between the intelligence community interfering as regards the Hunter Biden laptop, Zuckerberg giving $500 million to get out Democrat vote in Wisconsin, all the state legislators changing the rules. You had 5 counties in 5 swing states where they cut off the voting once Trump was ahead, by a huge amount. They cut off the counting and then they resume it 5 hours later, and all of a sudden Biden's ahead. I think the public knows how fraudulent that was. Whether they can get away with it again, I don't know, but they certainly seem to have the apparatus in place to do so in so many different ways.
Joel, thank you so much for being on. Would you please come back? I love your analysis. I'm a big fan of your work. Oh yeah, there's the DVD.
DVD and the book.
Yep. I haven't gotten the book yet. When I get the book, it's going to be covered with highlighters like all my other books. And SalemNow.com, that's where I streamed it.
Right. And the DVD and the book are on Amazon.com, and you'll learn Michele's real life story and her plan for power.
Well, we want to get you back. Love your analysis. God bless you. And for goodness sake, stay safe. I'm trusting that everything around you is bulletproof.
As long as I'm on your show, I'll make it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.